genuinely data driven, and that's, I think, really exciting, but also can sometimes be deeply challenging.
Great, thank you, Christophe. And some themes there I think we'll get into hopefully over the course of the conversation. I'm delighted that Megan Lee Devlin's also joined us. Megan, we're just doing introductions, so a little bit about yourself, but also a starter of a question about describing why data matters.
Oh, really good to be here with you this morning. So I'm Megan Lee Devlin. I'm the Chief Executive at the Central Digital and Data Office. Hopefully you've heard of CDDO, but our role is to lead the digital data and technology function for government. We do that from the Cabinet Office through three main ways. So through setting digital data and tech strategies, through setting standards for colleagues across governments, to help raise performance and enable them to meet those standards. And thirdly, we build digital skills and hold events such as Data Connect to bring people together, talk about digital data and technology topics, and spend time developing out our skills and capabilities in that space. A bit about me, I came from the private sector, joined government 2.5 years ago. In my previous life, I worked as a consultant, worked at IBM, PwC, and McKinsey. And across all of my career, or sort of a really central thread, has been the importance of data to enabling better outcomes. And Sue, to your specific question about why data matters, it matters, I think, because we do two core things across government. We deliver policy that shapes the economy and shapes people's lives, and we deliver services that help them get the outcomes that they need when they need them. And those two things can be improved and are improved in all pockets of government through better using data. It's everywhere. It's increasingly everywhere. Generative AI, for instance, doubling in strength every 59 days means that the quantity of data out there is really extraordinary. So it's never been more important for us to think quite critically about the data that we need in government to deliver better policy and better services, and making sure we harness that in the right ways.
Brilliant, thank you all. I think what you've all described there is kind of in various ways that data just doesn't sit in isolation from anything. So as much as I think a lot of you on the call with us, and certainly Christophe, John and I, we're thinking about some of the foundational stuff that doesn't live in isolation. It's an enabler for other things. And one of the things that I think would be of interest to people on this call is how does that feel as a data leader? So I certainly feel at times, talking to colleagues across other bits of the business, that we are in a kind of a bridging role in bridging the understanding of why we go on so much about kind of data foundations and data maturity, and being able to speak and influence the business. So I wonder, maybe I'll start, Christophe, with you first this time, and say, give us some reflections about what it's like to be a data or digital leader in your organisation and as a government leader, and how do you influence your business about why it's important to invest in data?
Yeah, so I mean, I think sort of a bit of a positive story around sort of 4.5 years ago when I kind of took on this job. So I'm a relatively long-serving civil servant in one of these domains, not with a deep data and technology background, but the first thing I was asked is, write me a data strategy, and then I sort of wrote one, and then they said, yeah, but how does that relate to reducing the cost to serve to the public? How do you then turn that into a transformation? And it was just really interesting that the maturity of my organization in engaging in the conversation and the substance was relatively weak, and my ability to communicate in terms that were meaningful for the rest of the business is also relatively weak. So where I think I'm sort of now is, it's been a sort of much more natural progression to try and tell those individual stories about there is somebody who's trying to get a passport, there is somebody trying to get across the border, there is someone who's reporting a rape or a serious sexual offence. How does what we do in terms of thinking about the really good management of the data and unlocking through often good technology as well, the capacity and willingness of frontline staff to go that extra mile to provide a brilliant service? So I've learned a lot around those stories, and as a sort of leader in the community, I have to spend a lot of time encouraging my team to do that and thinking about how you collaborate, how you tell those stories and connect. Yes, please, can we do some master data management through to that kind of experience on the front line? And that takes a lot of time and energy, but when you get it right, you can really see how people, you know, the shutters fall off their eyes and they go, oh, now I get it, as well.
Great. And Megan, you spend a lot of your time engaging with ministers and really senior civil servants and external stakeholders. What's your experience, and again, how are you communicating the importance of data to those stakeholders?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would describe what it's like being a data leader as in 2 words: extremely fulfilling. And I think that's because of 2 reasons. So one is because the impact you can have through harnessing data is really extraordinary. And I can share some examples of that. And then secondly, because the opportunity that remains to use data in new and interesting ways to deliver better outcomes is really extraordinary. So not only is it deeply fulfilling now to deliver great impact, but it's also very exciting in terms of the opportunities that exist to, for example, better use AI, but also to look ahead and think about the ways that we'll use data in the future. And on that point around impact, I'll share some of my favorite examples that I think really bring that to life. You may have heard of our CDDO Data Challenge, an annual event hosted by us in CDDO that enables people to put forward their best ideas as to how they can use data to do their jobs more effectively or to deliver better outcomes. And the winner this year of that particular challenge, it was a brilliant team with some of Christophe's colleagues actually in the Home Office, but also a cross-functional team across lots of different departments that patched together a whole heap of open source, but also government data to identify where risk factors combined to suggest the presence of modern slavery. Now, over 100,000, Christophe will know the numbers better than I do, people who are in extraordinarily challenging situations across the UK who are modern slaves. And this incredible use case enabled the police to better direct their resources, their time and their energy to find those people and help them. And I think that's the sort of example, and there are so many of them, I hear them daily, of examples of where we've used data to deliver a great outcome for the public. And that is what makes it such a fulfilling role to play in my experience.
Brilliant, thank you, Megan. And John, I mean, you described in your intro that you probably are like an old timer now, coming up to a year in post, but I think it's probably fair to say that you know, you are the first CDO of your type in Treasury, although I know that Treasury colleagues really see strategically the value of data and certainly through the initiatives and funding programs that they're leading across government. But what's been your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, I would reflect it's really exciting because it's the start of the journey. I think you've nailed it. We've arrived fashionably late to the data maturity scene, which is brilliant because we haven't got lots of technical debt. We haven't got lots of, you know, architecture to onboard. We're not an operational department, you know, we're a policy department, but it brings its own challenges. When you're in your early steps, the point Christophe made about making that connection between the outcomes, and Megan actually, the outcomes to the opportunity, that's really key. And the fact that it's a new Chief Data Officer role kind of suggests that the leadership are open to that change and recognise there's opportunities, but it's really important to make that real. I mean, within Treasury, there's a lot of pressures, ratcheting for, you know, reducing headcount, working more efficiently, One of the biggest challenges in Treasury is we've got lots of analysts who, as I've mentioned before, they're very vocal and descriptive about what opportunities they could be exploiting if only they were able to tackle some of the incumbent work in a different way. So I'm really keen to kind of make sure that there is that link between the work that we're doing in the hub and the impact that has on the analysts, because it will really kind of lever some of that. But in terms of how do I influence the business? I think some points that I would say is picking the right opportunities. You want to be picking projects that are regularly, or certainly I would consider in our infancy at Treasury, in terms of that data maturity, it needs to be a regular battle rhythm of wins that make sense to other areas of the business. So people can see what it's meant for that team, but relate that it could do the same for theirs. Embrace, evangelists. I was so surprised. Pleasantly surprised. I've got a hub in the middle, but actually there's a chorus of really kind of vocal analysts that are really keen to support and add value. And it's amazing how you can almost crowdsource, that network of willing people that are prepared to kind of put effort into to change normal process. Yeah, and I would say, if you find yourself in the same position as us, but even if not, I think a good way to live by is to create an environment where it's okay to fail. And I really like the phrase "move fast and break things" because it's quite empowering in that regard. Genuinely, just have a go. There are lots of reasons not to do something, but there are lots of reasons to try. And typically when you don't get something right, you learn, and that will go into the next time you try something. So. In terms of influence in the business, it's partly about that culture of kind of iterating, just having a go, and and seeing where you get to, and just communicating regularly.
Brilliant. Well, while you've been speaking there, the questions have been coming in thick and fast. Some of them are for you individually, so I might go with one of those each for one of each of you. And I'm just going to go in now in terms of the votes, and then there's some around kind of general standardization sharing that we can get onto as a follow-up question. So Megan, first one from you, from Faustina. Thank you for this question. From your experience, what learnings can we take from the private sector into the public sector to use data more efficiently and effectively?
That's a great question. Thank you. And I think John actually just alluded to what I think we can do to learn from the private sector. Now, government has a long history of not moving fast and breaking things, and that actually is for very good reason. And that's because we have a responsibility to use taxpayer funding responsibly, and we have a really important role in making sure we design services for the edge case, making sure our services are accessible, and that we've taken really sort of sensible approaches to how we've designed our services and used money spent on them effectively. Now, I think that's changing, and I think that's what's really exciting about right now in government. I think what the private sector have done very well, and that we are actively in all departments sort of harnessing and I suppose copying in a way, is the first is investing in foundations, and data sharing, good quality data and incredible insight doesn't just happen by accident. It requires really concerted strategic thinking around what are the capabilities we need, the technology we need, the processes we need, whether that's the data governance, the frameworks, the assurance processes, to make sure that we use data in the right way. And I think that we've made fantastic progress actually in the last 2 years on making sure that those foundational elements are there. And then the second is building a culture of, and this is where John's point comes in, trial and error. Failing fast, give something a go, patch together some data. Does it actually show us something interesting? If not, let's go back to the drawing board and think about, have we got the problem right? Have we got the right data sets? Have we got the right Are we thinking about this in the right way? So I think the first is that, so investing in foundations, the second, building the right culture. And then the third is making sure that everyone has the skills and the knowledge and the frameworks to be able to use data in their day-to-day life effectively. And Sue spoke earlier about, you as a data leader, and Christophe, John, Sue and I all consider ourselves to be data leaders. But I actually feel very strongly that in 2023, we are all data leaders. No matter what level you are in the organization, no matter what profession you work within, because we all need to use data. And so making sure we participate in things like One Big Thing, where we have access to the right skills. And that third piece around being able to equip our people with the skills, tools, and so on to be able to use data is something that the private sector has done very well, and is something that we're really focused on at the moment, which I hope you've seen through One Big Thing, but also lots more to come in that space. So I think it's a particularly exciting one.
Yeah, and I actually, those points that you're making around the foundations and the right culture, I think, Christophe, we've got a question for you that is probably connected in a way, but somebody, you struck a chord with somebody. How do you approach leading and persuading others in an organisation with vastly different purposes, but the same constraints?
I was kind of reflecting, there was one thing we haven't said, because it's all sounding very rosy at the moment. It does require quite a lot of perseverance. And I kind of think, look, that's true of anybody in pretty much any role. But as I do think this is in a sort of emergent area, and talking to colleagues who've been in the private sector, yeah, maybe 10 years ahead in some domains, but actually you listen to the stories they're telling, very similar challenges around getting off legacy data, moving off technology, trying to get data-driven techniques into business thinking, both in terms of operations as well as the analysis that is driven. So I think sometimes we kind of feel like it's all terrible and it's really hard. And sometimes it is really hard, and sometimes it is quite difficult to get things done. So holding on to that kind of personal resilience is something that I have to actively do from time to time. And actually just, listening to John's kind of wise words as well, is remembering that, from their perspective, sometimes you've got to have a nice quick win in order to make the case for the kind of foundational activity that Megan was talking about. And those sort of the ongoing challenge, and it, yes, can sometimes feel like a battle to make the place better through those really great improvements, is how I try and engage leaders in the sort of transformation that I know that we have to do and getting that sort of right balance. Just a small thing I would say for the public service, I would like to call it learn fast. And that does mean kind of choose the right ones. I don't want to learn on a new untested technique issuing 6 million passports, but maybe there are areas within there that I do want to learn something really fast that sits behind that, how you might make some improvements, ring fence some kind of trials and tests as well, and just up our confidence about taking a little bit of risk in certain scenarios as well. So just jumping in on the back of that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And if I kind of reflect on some of the things that I've worked on over the years, because I've been in and around this space for a while, and the length of time sometimes it can take from putting in a new bit of legislation or a new framework to start to see that being used. I mean, a really good example would be some of the powers that we put in back in 2017 in the Digital Economy Act, and it's in some cases responses to the various crises that we've had, but I think the potential of some of those powers hadn't been properly seen or understood until recent times, and then actually, for unusually, the legislation's there and waiting to be used to kind of help with supporting the cost of living crisis for families, particularly in kind of the energy and water poverty area. So sometimes it is, Christophe, about just kind of, it's about grounding yourself in knowing what others are doing in and around, in and outside government, and domestically and internationally, and knowing then that you are doing the right thing, and just knowing that some of it may be a quick win to show the art of the possible, as John's describing, but some of it might be we just know that we're doing the right thing, and it will have its day at some point in time. Just a little bit on that, John, got a question for you around your experience of kind of local and local government and civil service, and where they might be different. So what are the biggest differences? I mean, or are there any?
Oh God, I mean, there are lots of similarities, but there are huge differences. I mean, in a local government setting, local authorities, my role was much more operational than it is here, where it's policy focused. But that's quite helpful. You know, in a local setting, it's all around the individual. Within Treasury's policy setting, it's usually, you know, much more national, much more macro than that. But that's a really interesting context to bring across to the policy shaping here. In terms of understanding that local level impact, it's one of the areas that I'm really keen to kind of make an impact, actually, is around how do we shape policy while evaluate with the right data in shaping that policy, which does happen, but could happen more across more policy areas with more data. And the problem with more is the capacity it takes. So kind of working through that. But then how do we evaluate the impact? How do we make it real for the Treasury, but other departments, when we shape a policy, not moving on to the next big problem very quickly, but keeping an eye on the impact of that policy and making sure that everybody's across it. I think data is a real, it's an enabler for that. And it's brilliant, and we should put effort into it, but it's really difficult to unlock. So I say analysts are really used to working with data all of the time. It's kind of the core part of their role. Policy professionals tend to use data where it's available, but when it's difficult to use data to shape that policy, then, but there is, as a pressing timeline, as emerging or challenging policy issues kind of come and go with a really tight time box, then you do what you can with the information that you've got. And I think it's my role to make that information broader, more accessible, better shaped, and better suited. That's what we did from a local government setting. Whilst it was all around the individual, it's the data management principles. And, as you talked about, the foundations of capability. If people are at the heart of your service, then make sure the information you're keeping about people is accessible and used in lots of different ways. And that's a similar challenge that we have in Treasury. But, one that we've got in our sights, I think. So I think we'll make headway in that.
Brilliant. I'm going to open these next couple up. So if you want to put your kind of hands up to whichever of you want to come in first, there's a theme of questions around, I suppose, what's the broad vision for data sharing across government? And within that, what are your thoughts on standardization and is that important? So standardization around particular data standards, frameworks, policies, and maybe for all of you, if you feel comfortable, a lot of our focus in CDDO is on central government and agencies, although from a data perspective, we work right across the UK on particular initiatives. How far should our ambition around data sharing be going into that wider public sector UK wide? Any of you want to pick up first? John, and then Megan, and then Christophe.
I'll be brief. I'll talk about an observation that I had. I think, and I could have covered this in the last question actually, when there's a challenge, so I worked for North Yorkshire Council, and when there was a challenge around that spanned multiple public services in a local setting, if we could articulate that challenge and the outcome, we would work together very collegiately to make sure we could spot the data that we felt we needed to share across those departments, and we would make it happen. And it was very quick and rapid, and it was purposeful. And I recognise actually that at a national level that's much more challenging because the data is bigger, it's more complex. It's in lots of different types of systems. But I think we should be putting energy into making that simpler for when the need does occur, and thinking about the energy we put into those sharing opportunities when there is a problem that we need to kind of collaborate on. There's been a number of policies that I've been aware of in the short 12 months I've been here that would have been better shaped policies had we thought about the data that should be going into designing those policies and how we might best target the people that need the most support. And I think we should be thinking about that. At a local setting, we can do that. We can do that really quickly in really complex information sharing kind of structures. And if we can do it at a local setting, we should be thinking about why we're not doing it at a national one.
Challenge laid there, John. Megan.
Yeah, so I think I'll speak to the cross-government vision, and then I'm sure Christophe will be able to speak from the department level as well. But so at the cross-government level, I would categorize our vision, or sort of speak to 3 key points around our vision. So the first is that people can access the data that they need, which in itself is a challenge, discoverability at the moment, and being able to find data owners, so getting our metadata asset right. The second is around ensuring that when we find data, that it's of sufficiently high quality and that it's usable, which of course does involve some standardization, but I'll come on to how we're tackling that in a moment. And then the third is, once we've found the data, we have access to it, it's high enough quality that it's usable and we're able to extract real value from it. We then all have the right skills and expertise to use it responsibly, safely and securely. So that's the sort of cross-government vision. There's a lot of work across each of those 3 different lenses that you can hear about, I think, over the course of this week. So on discoverability, our data marketplace, on the quality pieces, tackling data maturity through our approach there. And then in terms of the skills, of course, that's why we are hosting a whole host of events to share great practices. And there's also loads of frameworks and guidance on gov.uk that you can use. So you can reach out to my team if you need a bit of help navigating through that. But I will say that this is a really huge challenge, particularly around standardization. I'm sure many of you have experienced that day to day. And so what I think is really important is that we focus our efforts. And John gave a great example of really high value data assets. And what we're thinking at the whole of government level is getting really clear on what our essential shared data assets is. And this is a new definition, a new standard that enables us to say at the whole of government level, these are our data assets that have the greatest value, that need to be shared in a way which is easy, consistent, and therefore thinking about how do we drive standardization amongst those specific data assets. I think that focus is really important, because otherwise the challenge is just, enormous. You could spend several careers trying to tackle data standardization in government and never have totally cracked it. So the key thing is focusing on those challenges that we collectively care most about, and then making sure that we can build standardization, usability, and quality into those data assets.
Brilliant. Yes, and I think we do have something on pretty much all of those aspects over the course of this week. Christophe.
Yeah, and just to say, I mean, I have personally a very kind of ambitious view of how we push through to data sharing, having seen what you can do at an operational level or an insight level from things like, the EU settlement scheme, where we were able to simply call up HMRC through an API, not really data sharing, but it's a data access question, brought lots of the similar issues. And we were able to ask, did this person earn a certain amount of money? Did they do it in this particular period of time? Improved data protection outcomes, gave a massively better service to the individuals. We didn't need to see all the files on their personal tax history, and we were able to deliver a brilliant outcome. The thing I would say, and I'm personally a big fan of standardization, very much agree with what Megan was saying, is you can't do everything. I think there's something really important about looking at the big issues or the tactical issues, taking that learning and then feeding it back into the strategic. I really do think we have an obligation to drive out the friction, and I'll call it the unnecessary friction that exists in decision making around access or sharing of data. The thing, though, I'd really pick up on, though, is the point I think John described, focusing on the people and the problems. There are real issues with sharing personal data, notably personal data, but also other forms of data. There are costs, there are risks, and there are reasons why certain members of the public would behave differently towards your host organization if you are now sharing that data with other. These are not made up challenges. So I think being able to focus really hard on what the problem is you're trying to address, engaging with the substance of that, and often you'll find that the legislation is not the barrier. You'll find the technology is worth getting through, and you will understand that there is a benefit in driving to all parties involved on that. And as I say, I think kind of some of this standardization is what will really help us reduce that friction. But this is going to be a really long, ongoing journey. So pick the right problems, press the right cases, take the learning on the standardization, and then build it back into our strategies would be the take I have.
Brilliant, thank you all. I mean, there's been so much in that. I'm sure we could keep going for another 45 minutes to start to dig into some of those issues. But I think we've covered a lot of bases this morning around kind of what it feels like, what our collective vision is, because they're all kind of interconnected, really, around helping to make better use of data precisely for those different outcomes, reflection on how you might go about that through identifying some things where you can start to bring other colleagues who may not be data practitioners along with you, some tips around influencing, some careful reminders around being in government means that we do have a responsibility. I'm not saying that other organisations don't, but I think we feel more keenly the responsibility around the proper and appropriate use of data. So in the couple of minutes that we've got left, and sorry to others who've asked lots of great questions, I hopefully covered off the main in the questions that we've got. But I'd just like to kind of hear, given Megan, I might come to you first, because you described us all as being data leaders. But for anybody aspiring to a data leadership role, whatever that might be in the future, because it's changing all the time, and we shouldn't just assume that it's going to be a CDO, could be a permanent secretary with a data background. What advice would you give to somebody aspiring to a leadership position who might currently be a data governance manager or a data ethicist or a data scientist?
So I think I would share two pieces of advice. First of all, a thought. So the thought is there is no other organisation in the UK where it's more exciting to be a data leader than in government. I fundamentally believe that. So first of all, stay in government. And then in terms of my couple of pieces of advice, the first is really get to know the business that you're serving and understand the problems that they're facing and help them on the journey in terms of understanding how data can enable them to tackle the problems that they're solving more effectively, more quickly, and so on. And so really sort of building those relationships and not operating off in a silo. And then the second is really around finding the area of government that you really love. Government is such a sort of melting pot of so many different policy areas, operational delivery areas, different services, different interests, different topics, different themes, different challenges. And so there will be a place in government where you can put your data skills to solving problems you really care about. And my advice would be find the people tackling those knotty problems that you really care about. And find great people who you can learn from, and who also you can add a lot of value and bring them on that journey towards better harnessing data.
Brilliant, thank you. John, Christophe, is there anything quickly that you'd add in the last minute that we've got?
I'm going to cheat a little and say there's one issue which we haven't really picked up on here at all, which I want to raise. Think about the data you're going to need in 5 years' time. There are a whole bunch of people that we don't see, or information about the people that we serve that we don't see. And I think particularly around public sector equality duty and diversity related information, but there are a whole bunch of other things. So as a data leader now, think about what data you're going to need or your leaders are going to need in a few years' time, so we can start collecting it to answer the really thorny questions in the future. And that way, I think we will be really serving the public.
Brilliant, thank you. John?
Yeah, really quickly, I would say the best leaders I've worked with had a good mix of understanding the business and understanding the capability and the opportunity. Building on Megan and Christophe's points, I think they're both completely valid. I would say make sure that you keep that balance as you tackle those problems, because the worst thing that you can find yourself in is when you've done some fantastic work and the business just don't get the opportunity or the value because you've not brought them with you. So don't lose sight of that and make sure that you bring them with you.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, thank you to my wonderful panel, Megan, Christophe and John. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for your questions. Sorry we didn't get around to all of them, but hopefully that has given you a good idea of what it's like to be a data leader in government, and hopefully given you some food of thought to be a data leader for the future. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of the week.
Thank you, Sue. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy.
Thank you.